Today, we are exploring a battle that is just legendary in military history. This is the incredible story of how one single general, with a smaller, seemingly weaker army, engineered this perfect trap that led to one of the bloodiest days the Roman Republic ever had to face, the Battle of Cannae.
So let's start with this scene right here, because it really captures one of the most catastrophic days for the Roman Republic. We're talking August 2nd, 216 BC. A Carthaginian army, led by the brilliant Hannibal Barca, is facing a Roman force that outnumbers them almost 2-1. But what happened next? Well, it wasn't just a defeat for Rome. It was a total annihilation. It was a masterclass in military strategy.
And the scale of that annihilation, it is truly hard to comprehend. According to the historian Polybius, in just one single day of fighting, Rome lost 70,000 soldiers. 70,000 killed or captured. To this day, it's still one of the most lethal single days of combat in the entire ancient world. So, you have to ask, how did this happen, right? How did one man, Hannibal with an army that was smaller and way more diverse, not just defeat, but utterly destroy the largest fighting force Rome had ever put together? Well, let's get into it. Okay, so to really get what happened at Cannae, you first have to understand just how desperate the Romans were. See, Hannibal had already been running around Italy for 2 years, and he'd already handed them 2 humiliating defeats with his clever ambushes and just, frankly, superior tactics. Roman patience was completely gone. They were done. They decided to stop chasing his shadow and just build an army so massive it could just crush him with brute force.
So let's look at the timeline here. After his legendary crossing of the Alps back in 218 BC, Hannibal basically spent 2 years just outsmarting the Romans at every turn. And those victories you see at Trebia and Lake Trasimene, they weren't just defeats for Rome. They were huge embarrassments that really shook the Republic to its core. So when Hannibal goes and seizes the crucial supply depot at Cannae, threatening Rome's resources directly, well, that was the final provocation. That was the last straw.
So what did Rome do? Well, in response, they completely abandoned their cautious Fabian strategy. That whole tactic of avoiding a big, direct battle and just trying to wear Hannibal down with little fights and by cutting his supply lines. They were done with being cautious. As the historian Polybius tells us, they decided to bring 8 legions into the field, which was something that had never, ever been done at Rome before. The plan wasn't about strategy anymore. It was all about brute force. But this massive army had a fatal flaw, a really big one. You see, its command rotated daily between 2 consuls who had completely opposite ideas about how to fight. On one hand, you had Lucius Aemilius Paulus. He was cautious, prudent. He knew it was foolish to fight Hannibal on open ground where his cavalry was just better. And on the other hand, you had Gaius Terentius Varro. He was reckless, overconfident, and he was just itching to fight Hannibal and win a glorious victory. And guess who was in command on the day of the battle? Yep, the reckless one, Varro. All right, so now we're moving to the battlefield itself to see how these 2 armies really stacked up against each other. And you have to remember, this wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a clash of philosophies. Okay, so when you look at the numbers, you can really see the core of each army's strategy. Rome had this massive, almost 2-to-1 advantage in infantry. That was the engine of their military machine. But then, look at the cavalry numbers. Hannibal had the advantage there, and it was a critical one, not just in numbers, but in skill and experience. And he knew this was his key to winning the whole thing. And this famous little exchange here just shows you Hannibal's genius. So one of his officers, a guy named Gisgo, is really worried about how huge the Roman army is. And Hannibal just looks at him and replies, "In all those great numbers before us, there is not one man called Gisgo." And apparently this dry wit just cut right through the tension and got all his troops laughing. See, he wasn't just a general, he was a master psychologist, a master of morale. He knew his men were nervous, but he also had total confidence that his plan was going to work. So this gets us to the really crucial point. How did Hannibal plan to take Rome's greatest strength, its powerful, deep-packed infantry, and turn it into its own fatal weakness? Well, Hannibal's formation was just a work of deceptive genius. Take a look at this diagram. He puts his less experienced Spanish and Gallic troops right in the center and then pushes them forward in this kind of crescent shape. Now, what does that do? It deliberately creates what looks like a weak, bulging target. It was basically an irresistible lure for the very disciplined but also very predictable Roman legions. So the whole plan was designed to unfold in 3 perfect steps. First, you have the lure. As the Romans smash into that weak center, it's designed to slowly retreat, pulling the Roman legions deeper and deeper into a pocket. Second, destroy.
While all that's happening with the infantry, Hannibal's elite cavalry is going to just overwhelm the weaker Roman cavalry on the flanks. And finally, number 3, spring the trap. His veteran African infantry, who he held in reserve on the wings, would then turn inward as his cavalry swoops around to attack the Roman rear. And just like that, the encirclement is complete.
And the trap sprung perfectly. The Romans, thinking they were about to win, just surged forward, packing their own lines tighter and tighter. They had literally walked themselves right into a kill box. And now they were completely surrounded, packed so tightly together that they could barely even lift their arms to fight back.
So, the result of this perfect encirclement, well, it wasn't really a battle anymore. It was a slaughter. What followed was one of the most lethal single days of fighting in all of human history.
The Roman legionaries were trapped and helpless. They were just massacred. The pace of the killing was horrific. I mean, by one estimate, nearly 600 men were dying every single minute. There was nowhere to run, no escape, and no mercy was shown.
The final death toll was just immense. Now, ancient historians like Livy and Polybius give us slightly different figures, but no matter how you look at it, the losses were absolutely catastrophic. To try and put that into a more modern context, some historians have compared the Roman deaths at Cannae to the staggering number of British casualties on just the first day of the Battle of the Somme.
And when news of this disaster finally got back to Rome, it caused a level of panic they had never seen before. The historian Livy wrote that the entire city was just thrown into confusion and panic. Almost every single noble family had lost someone. They became so desperate to appease the gods that they even resorted to the grim and very rare ritual of human sacrifice.
This statue here really captures the totality of Hannibal's victory. As proof of what he'd done, he sent thousands of gold signet rings, stripped from the bodies of the Roman nobles he'd killed, back to Carthage. You see, he hadn't just defeated an army, he had wiped out an entire generation of Rome's ruling class.
So why are we still talking about this? Why does a battle that happened over 2,000 years ago still matter so much? Well, let's take a look at its incredible, lasting legacy.
And this leads us to the great what-if of the entire war. You see, Hannibal's cavalry commander, a guy named Hannibal, famously told him, "You, Hannibal, know how to gain a victory, you do not know how to use it." He was begging him to march on Rome immediately, but Hannibal refused. He didn't think his army was ready for a long siege. And that decision, well, it's something historians have debated for centuries. Was that the moment he could have actually won the war?
But beyond the devastating effect it had on Rome, the true legacy of Cannae is tactical. It became the textbook definition of a battle of annihilation, the perfect encirclement. For the next 2,000 years, military commanders would study Hannibal's masterpiece. We're talking everyone from Frederick the Great in Prussia to Napoleon, all the way up to America's General Norman Schwarzkopf in the Gulf War. Generals have been trying to replicate the perfect trap of Cannae ever since.
And that leaves us with the ultimate irony of Cannae. By winning the most crushing victory you could possibly imagine, but then failing to march on Rome itself, did Hannibal actually sow the seeds of his own defeat? He destroyed a Roman army, yes, but he hadn't destroyed the Roman will to fight. And in the long, bloody run, it was that resilience, that refusal to give up, that would ultimately decide the war.